It's a mystery along the Pacific coast. Gray whales are dying in large numbers. At least 167 have washed ashore from Mexico to Alaska since January 1st. Experts say that's probably just a fraction of those that have actually died.
Beaches along the west coast are looking more like crime scenes as investigators examine bodies that have washed ashore. They're trying to solve a marine mystery. Why are so many gray whales dying?
It looks like it's on track to reach or exceed the most we've ever seen in a previous year.
So far this year, at least 167 dead gray whales have washed up on shorelines from Mexico to Alaska. And it's believed hundreds more could be dead in the ocean.
One of the most common features we're seeing is that the whales are extremely emaciated, malnourished.
Most of them travel from Baja, Mexico to their main feeding grounds in the Arctic and then back. It's one of the longest mammal migrations on Earth.
The Mediterranean Sea, as you know, is famous for its picturesque beaches and clear blue waters, but beneath it all, the equivalent of nearly 34,000 plastic bottles is being dumped into it every single minute. Now, this is one of the findings of a report by the Worldwide Fund for Nature issued to mark World Oceans Day. The UN estimates 100,000 marine animals die in our oceans every year by eating plastic or getting tangled in it. Now, if the trend continues, Greenpeace warns that by 2050, there'll be more plastic in the oceans than fish. The WWF wants to eliminate plastic rubbish in nature by the year 2030. The group says due to increased tourism around the world, governments are under pressure to manage the amount of plastic being used.
The Mediterranean region is one of the most visited regions in the world. So every year we welcome thousands of millions of tourists, and this produces an increase of waste generation along the coasts. In some areas like Italy and Greece, we estimate a 30% increase in waste generation. This, of course, puts enormous pressure on local municipalities that are already struggling in managing their waste in an appropriate way.
A large number of highly radioactive isotopes released by the destruction of the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant grossly contaminated the Japanese mainland. Most of these radionuclides had short half-lives, which meant they would essentially disappear in a matter of days or months. For many of those who were exposed to them, there will be major health consequences. However, there are some radioactive elements that will not rapidly disappear, and it is these long-lived radionuclides that will remain to negatively affect the health of all complex life forms that are exposed to them. Chief among them is cesium-137, which has taken on special significance because it's proven to be the most abundant of the long-lived radionuclides that has remained in the environment following the nuclear disasters at Chernobyl and Fukushima. It has a 30-year radioactive half-life, which is why it persists in the environment. Scientists now believe that it will be 180 to 320 years before the cesium-137 around the destroyed Chernobyl reactor actually disappears from the environment. Cesium is water-soluble and quickly makes its way into soils and waters. It's the same atomic family as potassium, and it mimics it, acting as a macronutrient. It quickly becomes ubiquitous in contaminated ecosystems. It is distributed by the catastrophic accidents at nuclear power plants because large quantities of volatile radioactive cesium build up inside the fuel rods of nuclear reactors. Thus, any accident at a nuclear reactor that causes the fuel rods to rupture, melt, or burn will cause the release of radioactive cesium gas. Long-lived radionuclides, such as cesium-137, are something new to us as a species. They did not exist on Earth in any appreciable quantities during the entire evolution of complex life. Although they are invisible to our senses, they are millions of times more poisonous than most of the common poisons we are familiar with. They cause cancer, leukemia, genetic mutations, birth defects, malformations, and abortions at concentrations almost below human recognition and comprehension. They are lethal at the atomic or molecular level. They emit radiation, invisible forms of matter and energy that we might compare to fire, because radiation burns and destroys human tissue. But unlike the fire of fossil fuels, the nuclear fire that issues forth from radioactive elements cannot be extinguished. It is not a fire that can be scattered or suffocated, because it burns at the atomic level. It comes from the disintegration of single atoms. Thus, radioactivity is a term which indicates how many radioactive atoms are disintegrating in a time period. We measure the intensity of radioactivity by the rate of disintegrations and the energy they produce. 1 becquerel is equal to 1 atomic disintegration per second. 1 curie is defined as that amount of any radioactive material that will decay at a rate of 37 billion disintegrations per second. So 1 curie equals 37 billion becquerels. Sometimes these man-made radionuclides are compared to naturally occurring radionuclides, such as potassium-40, which is always found in bananas and other fruits. However, this is a false comparison, since naturally occurring radioactive elements are very weakly radioactive. In the charts from the labs that are in green up there, the radioactivity is described as a specific activity. Note that potassium-40 has a specific activity of 71 10-millionths of a curie per gram. Compare that to the 88 curies per gram for cesium-137. It's like comparing a stick of dynamite to an atomic bomb.
Absence of waste, that's what efficiency is. Absence of waste. This system is more wasteful than all the other existing systems in the history of the planet. Every level of life organization and life system is in a state of crisis and challenge and decay or collapse. No peer-reviewed journal in the last 30 years will tell you anything different. That is that every life system is in decline, as well as social programs, as well as our water access. Try to name any means of life that isn't threatened and in danger. You can't. There really isn't one, and that's very, very despairing. But we haven't even figured out the causal mechanism. We don't want to face the causal mechanism. We just want to go on, that's what insanity is, where you keep doing the same thing over and over again, though it clearly doesn't work. So you're really dealing with not an economic system, but I would go so far as to say an anti-economic system.
Addictions are usually considered to be a drug-related issue, but looking at it more broadly, I define addiction as any behavior that is associated with craving, with temporary relief, and with long-term negative consequences, along with an impairment of control over it, so that the person wishes to give it up or promises to do so, but can't follow through. And when you understand that, then you can see that there are many more addictions than simply those related to drugs. So there's workaholism, there's addiction to shopping, to the internet, to video games. There's the addiction to power. People have power, but they want more and more and more. Nothing is ever enough for them. Acquisition, corporations that must own more and more. The addiction to oil, but at least to the wealth and to the products made accessible to us by oil. Look at the negative consequences on the environment. We're destroying the very earth that we inhabit for the sake of that addiction. Now, these addictions are far more devastating in their social consequences than the cocaine or heroin habits of my downtown East Side patients. Yet they're rewarded and considered to be respectable. The tobacco company executive that shows a higher profit will get a much bigger reward. He doesn't face any negative consequences legally or otherwise. In fact, he's a respected member of the board of several other corporations. But tobacco smoke-related diseases kill 5.5 million people around the world every year. In the United States, they kill 400,000 people a year. And these people are addicted to what? To profit. To such a degree are they addicted that they're actually in denial about the impact of their activities, which is typical for addicts, is denial. And that's a respectable one. It's respectable to be addicted to profit no matter what the cost. So what is acceptable and what is respectable is a highly arbitrary phenomenon in our society. And it seems like the greater the harm, the more respectable the addiction.